Hello, and welcome to the Kidsmin Collective podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and today we are going to be diving into a critical truth that all behavior is communication. And understanding this can transform our approach to children's ministry. I have been having this conversation on more than one occasion recently, and it's just been on my heart to just share this just this truth of remembering that behavior is communication, whether a child is 2 or a child is 12. That is true. When they are expressing a behavior, whether that's wanted or unwanted from adults, it is communication. They're trying to tell us something. And so obviously thinking through that a little bit more for the littles, you can tell that you see a lot more behavior that you might not understand. And so I don't even know at what point I learned this or where I picked this up, but just through my experience and my time in both kids ministry and in special needs ministry, I've seen it from both of those perspectives. And so reframing how I thought about behavior, it was critical to changing how I was doing ministry. So one of the first things that we need to do is we need to understand, what does it actually mean that behavior is communication? Like I said, kids, especially the younger ones, they often don't have a lot of words to express their big emotions or their needs. One of the prime examples of this is, we call it the terrible twos, right? This is when kiddos are biting, they start hitting other kids, they throw tantrums, you just can't understand what they're doing it to. And we call it the terrible twos because we are so frustrated with trying to understand what they want and what they need. But also, I've heard the term too is the three-nagers, right? They have this big attitude. They're doing all these things, communicating these things with their actions, but it's hard to decipher what that means. And so we have to remember, a 2-year-old, they have big emotions. They know what they want. They know what they're trying to get. But a lot of 2-year-olds don't have words yet to say, I would like that toy. Can you please give me that toy? So they know in their mind they want the toy. And in order to get that, they can't verbally communicate that. So instead, they hit another kid or they bite the other child. Again, just reframing the way we think about the fact that behaviors are communication. And so behavior becomes their language, whether that's acting out, withdrawing, being overly silly. They could be defiant. They could just not listen. Any of those things are communication. So this is especially going to be true for children with trauma, children with special needs, or developmental delays. And so it's good to keep ourselves aware of those things and to know these kids and to know these families as you're leading your ministry. And so one example of that might be a kid who hit somebody else. It might not be just this defiant, I'm super mad and I'm super upset, so I'm going to hit. They might be overwhelmed and they just don't know how to express that any other way than hitting another child. And they're not necessarily aggressive children. They just are communicating their frustration and their overwhelm by hitting, because that's the only thing they know how to do in that moment, or that's their first response. There's also, you could think about a kid who's always talking and being super chatty all the time. They might be anxious, or they might be craving connection. It might not be this desire to just be disruptive all the time. And so we tend to see some more of that the older kids get. So we have to shift and reframe from discipline to discovery. So that is a big thing that helped me reframe how I was doing ministry as I was thinking about behavior and processing that. So if we think through the lens of getting curious instead of frustrated about the behavior. So moving out of this idea that we just come into the situation and say, what is wrong with this kid? I need to stop this behavior. Why aren't they listening? Why aren't they doing what they're supposed to? To reframing the way we think about it to say, what is this child trying to tell me? That means that we as kids ministry leaders, we need to think about it from that perspective. We need to coach our volunteer leaders to think about it from that perspective and to respond with empathy and not only just correction. So introducing more of this concept or this idea of compassionate curiosity. So just a practical tip in that is to the first thing to think about when you have a child that's being difficult or you're stepping into a situation where discipline is potentially necessary, asking yourself, what need might this child have that is not being met right now? Or another way to frame that would be, what is this child trying to communicate with me? What is their behavior trying to tell me? I want to take a second to address the fact that we cannot just dismiss behavior. So please do not hear that. If children are hitting other kids in a classroom, if they're being potentially harmful to teachers, kids in the classroom, anybody, obviously we have to handle that, right? And so we're not just saying, dismiss their disruptive behavior and let it go because we're trying to figure out what they're communicating. Obviously, you need to do what's in the best interest of that child. You need to do what's in the best interest of the whole class and do what makes sense, right? But it's helpful to come at it from an approach to remember that their behavior is communicating something. And so obviously, if a child is hitting other children in the class, please remove them from that situation, pull them out. You can take them into the hallway, and then depending on their age, right, you can have a conversation with them. Don't be afraid to shy away from asking a 3-year-old, why are you hitting other kids? You'd be surprised at the number of kids who are 3 who can answer that question. You might have to do a little bit of digging, right, and ask additional questions. But 3-year-olds are able to start talking more than you would think they are and processing through that. They just don't know how to get from point A to point D. They need you to fill in A, B, C, and D for them, right? And lead them through that to say, okay, but why are you hitting? Well, I'm hitting because that kid took my toy. Okay, well, why did you want the toy? Asking them those questions to understand where they're coming from. So all emotions are not bad, but emotions are communicating things just as much. So remembering to shift from the discipline to the discovery mindset, but also not just dismissing behavior that is not okay. Some quick potential things that you might see in a classroom, common behaviors, and potentially what they could be communicating. So, tantrums, we see this a lot. Kids throw a fit, right? You see this at the grocery store. You see this at home. You see this in a classroom. Some of the things that they might be throwing tantrums over could be they're overstimulated. Maybe they're fatigued and extremely tired. You don't know. I know that one of the key indicators to poor choices in the classroom on Sunday morning always came from, not always, often came from what happened on the weekend. We're at the last day of the weekend. Kids have been up late on Friday night. Grandma and grandpa are in town. They did super fun things yesterday, went to a theme park and stayed up late and ate ice cream at 9 p.m. And then mom got them up for church and brought them to class at 9 a.m. and they're exhausted, right? And so those are things, especially for younger kids, that we see that fatigue and exhaustion causes them to act out. And so sometimes just digging into what's going on at home, what is it? Is this an atypical thing that's just occurring this one time, or is this patterns over time, right? So tantrums could signify overstimulation, exhaustion, potentially lack of control, depending on the situation. Sometimes we see silence or withdrawal. That often can be a leading indicator of anxiety, fear, potentially insecurity. Often we see this a lot with visitors to a class or new kids to the church. If they've never been before, you can sometimes see this in kids who are going through some pretty hard or traumatic things at home. Maybe parents are getting divorced and they don't know how to handle it, so they're withdrawing. Maybe you're seeing this for if they're transitioning, right? Maybe they just moved schools and they're no longer at the same school and they're changing classrooms, or they just moved to the area, or maybe they're even changing classrooms at church. And so often you can see some of this transition causes that anxiety, fear, insecurity, and ultimately the behavior is then silence or withdrawal. Sometimes you see constant movement. I know this is a pain point for a lot of teachers, especially if you have some older teachers that are part of a generation where they are used to this is the classroom. We sit down in a chair, we sit down on the carpet, we fold our hands, we don't move. I know that tended to be some of my older generation teachers were the most phenomenal teachers, and also some of the ones that wanted a classroom structured like that. And so we sometimes see that this constant movement is potentially indicating some kind of sensory need that the child has. And just because a child has a sensory need does not mean that they have some kind of a special need or a disability necessarily. Every kid needs different stimulation in different ways, right? Just like as an adult, your love language might be physical touch, or it might be gifts, right? And so for physical touch people, they crave that connection. They want to hug. They want to sit right next to you. They might want to hold your hand. And so sometimes kids just have a sensory need. They want and they long to be loved. And part of that might just be they need the nearness, they need the closeness, or it might be the opposite. They need some space. They need a quiet space to be a place where they aren't feeling so overwhelmed. Constant movement could also indicate extreme excitement, a need for attention. So those are just a couple of things that constant movement could mean. It doesn't necessarily mean specifically a special need or a disability in that case. Disruptiveness can often be an indicator of lack of boundaries at home, potentially some unmet emotional need. And so it's good to just, again, think through what some of these common behaviors could be communicating. Now, a note to this, just because some kid is throwing a temper tantrum doesn't mean that it's only because they are extremely exhausted or overstimulated. These are just some possible options for that. So just keep those in mind. So I encourage you, and this would be both from a kidsmin staff position, but also from a teacher and leader position, is to be observing patterns, not just single moments. So one of the things to think about, like I mentioned, that extreme exhaustion, right? If kids have a really abnormal weekend, the other thing that I see a lot with abnormal or atypical schedules, mom and dad went on vacation for a week and grandma and grandpa stayed at the house. And then mom and dad are back on Saturday and bring the kids to church Sunday. And now they're wild and crazy. And I'm like, what is going on? These are consistent families, consistent kids. I know that they're not typically like this on a Sunday as far as their behavior goes. And then I start asking questions and I'm like, got it. Mom and dad were gone for a week. Grandma and grandpa were here. I'm sure, boundaries were different. They probably got to do fun things. Nothing was typical as far as routines go. They're excited that parents are home. So look for the patterns and observe in these kids what is going on. And so that might be a consistency over several weeks. That might be just a single moment, and determine kind of how you're going to handle some of the situations based on those patterns that you're seeing. And also, this is just a caveat to that is this is a great reason why you should get to know the families in your ministry, not just the kids that you see on Sunday, not just the volunteers, but to know those families and to say, this is atypical behavior for this child. And so I would often call mom on Monday morning and say, hey, I didn't get a chance to talk to your kid, but I do know that they were having a rough day yesterday. They cried a lot more than normal. What does that look like? And mom would say, oh yeah, I was out of town and the routines were different. And I was like, great. Okay, got it. And so it helps to be able to have those conversations if you have relationships built with families. So just keep that in mind. Some of the tools that you can use to interpret behavior is to build relationships with the kids as well. So don't just build them with families, while that is extremely important. And yes, you want that because then you can have communication with parents. But building those relationships with the kids allows you to know what is typical behavior, what is atypical behavior. And so that's really an important piece of that. And so when I was on staff at a church, was at a pretty big church. I saw an average of usually about 150 children, just 3 and 4-year-olds. And so most of the time, I didn't know a lot of the kids in the ministry unless they were getting in trouble, which was so sad. I wanted to know every child, but building those relationships and having your teachers build those relationships. So if you're unable to meet the needs, and I mean, you are unable to meet the needs of all of these kids, every family, like you can't be that sole person. So disciple other people in your ministry as teachers, and maybe you raise up specific leaders who are connecting with those kids. And just allow them to build relationships. And then if they have questions, you become a resource hub for them, right? Okay, here's how we equip you to do this. Here's how I can help you. So just be building those relationships with the kids and families. The other thing that people often shy away from, and I've heard many times, both from staff in kids ministry, but also from teachers, is, well, kids go to school all week and they have all these rules and they have to do everything. So let's let them have free reign and just have a bunch of fun on a weekend. And kids actually crave consistency. Even though they would never say that, especially the older you get, kids don't, they pretend as though they do not want consistency, but kids need to know what to expect. They need to know that they show up, this is what's expected of them, and this is how things are going to go. And there needs to be some predictability in this. That helps reduce anxiety. And again, this is for any child, whether they have special needs or not, but is definitely, this is a much bigger deal for children with special needs. And so it helps reduce their anxiety-driven behavior when you're using consistent routines. So kids crave that. They need the guardrails and they need the expectations. So that means that if there is a set of expectations that are set out for the kids, during story time, we come and we sit on the carpet and we need to keep our hands to ourselves. Okay, we know kids have an off day, right? Like that doesn't always happen. But if you've said, okay, if you can't keep your hands to yourself, then you're going to have to come sit over here outside of the carpet with me. Make sure that you follow through on that consequence, because when you say, here's the consequence, and then you don't follow through, that becomes an empty threat. And then they are learning that the routine is that you tell them what to do and then don't make them do it. So they're learning something different than what you want them to learn as far as discipline or consequence and behavior goes. And so the other thing to keep in mind with that is you have to make your consequences appropriate. It depends. It's going to be a very different consequence for a 3-year-old than it is going to be for a 7-year-old. And so just be keeping those in mind. It needs to be dependent on their age. It needs to be dependent on their developmental level, and it needs to be, the punishment needs to fit the crime, right? We hear that a lot in parenting, but it needs to make sense in the context of what is going on and what the behavior was. And so if at all possible, it helps if you can use consistent teachers. Not only does it help to have the consistent routine and schedule within the classroom. So, first is we come in, we play, then we take a break and we have story time and we start with that. Then we do snack time and then we do our craft. And then we do a Bible activity. Like if that's the consistent routine that the kids have, and that could be for a 2-year-old and that can be for a 12-year-old, right? But obviously with age appropriate activities. So if they have the routine, they know what that looks like. And then on top of that, they have super consistent teachers. That is going to be the absolute best case scenario, right? The teachers know what to expect. They get to build relationships differently with the children. And then also, the kids know what to expect. They know who their teachers are. They know what that looks like. They know what they're going to step into the classroom and what that's going to be like. And you build rapport, right? Both of them are building rapport with each other. Something you can do that's just a practical, people don't often think about this, is creating some kind of a sensory friendly space or a calming corner. If a kid can't keep their hands to themselves, again, whether they're in, preschool or they're in fifth grade, and they can't keep their hands on themselves, they're being fidgety, whatever, you can have a sensory friendly space or just a corner that they can go and calm down, or just not be by other kids. Sometimes they just need that. I often would have a box of fidget toys. This is when I was more in special needs ministry, but had a box of fidget toys so that if there was something specific that a kid could really use, that was helpful. It kept them occupied and kept their hands calm and to themselves instead of everywhere else. And then just equip your volunteer leaders to respond with grace and not just rules. Again, we can't just dismiss bad behavior, and we have to keep people and other kids in the room safe, but equipping them to respond with grace and to say, hey, we need to figure out what are they trying to communicate with us rather than just disciplining them for bad behavior. So you can partner with your parents to understand a kid's story. I think this is a huge critical piece that sometimes we miss. We are caught up a lot in the logistics of Sunday morning and making sure check-in works and check-out works and kids are doing what they're supposed to and everything goes off without a hitch. But there is a huge power in partnering with parents. One of the best things I could ever do was make phone calls on Monday. I would, often because I had a large group of kids that I was overseeing, the teachers from the classroom would tell the parents, hey, this thing happened in class, we had to discipline them, whatever. And instead of just letting that go, I asked the teachers to please communicate that information to me. And then when that information was communicated, and then in turn would call the parents on Monday and say, hey, I just want to check in. First of all, it's no big deal, that this thing happened. We handled it. We're not upset, but just want to check in and make sure things are okay. And that often opens up this opportunity for you to build relationship with family, for them to know, oh, you're coming at this from we want to partner together. I want to love your kid better. How can I serve them and help them? And so that is a huge win for your ministry is when you can begin partnering with parents. So those are just some quick tools that you can utilize. And so remember the role of grace and the gospel. Again, I want to be clear, it is not dismissing bad behavior, but also we have to respond the way that Jesus did, right? So Jesus met people where they were, including when they had bad behaviors or brokenness. We're all broken human beings. And so how do we as kidsmin leaders love our kids and meet them where they're at in their behaviors, in their crazy emotions, when they don't know how to explain what they're thinking? To be honest, we're adults and we don't always know how to explain what we're thinking or feeling. And so can you imagine being a kid who has way less vocabulary and words to explain that and experience to know, oh, this is why I feel this way. And so just as much as adults, kids are struggling with behavior because they're trying to communicate things and they're broken human beings as well. And so Jesus met people where they're at, and we get the privilege and the honor of loving kids in that way also. Kids need to know that they're loved even when they mess up. And so it's okay to have a whoops mistake. I did something I wasn't supposed to, or I had an outburst that I shouldn't have had. And kids need to know that they're loved in that moment. It's okay for kids to make mistakes. But just like Jesus, he loves people, but he also speaks truth. So how do we do both of those things? We have to let grace and the gospel intersect. And so behavior isn't just a problem to solve. It's actually an invitation to connect. It gives us an invitation to connect with kids, to tell them that they're loved, to help them learn how to handle some of these behaviors, to figure out how to handle some of their emotions. And but also it's an invitation to connect with families. Just like I said, it gives you the opportunity to call mom and dad on Monday and say, hey, this happened yesterday. This is what we did. This is how we, walked your child through this situation. Want you to know, but also how can we support you and love you in this? And so walking with families in that as well gives us that huge blessing and ability to just connect and to love people and to speak truth. And so what if we as a church became the place where we answer with love instead of just discipline or correction. Again, I want to be extremely clear. We're not dismissing behavior, and we do have to correct those things, but we speak we speak the truth in love at a kid's age appropriate level, no matter what age they are. So just some challenge for you to think through that lens as you're leading your ministry and training and equipping your volunteers. And so I just want to remind you that as leaders, we are not just behavior managers, right? It is not just our job to manage and make sure kids are doing exactly what they're supposed to all the time, but we are here to shepherd their hearts. We get to teach the gospel. We get to train and teach them that they're loved. And so I will say this again and again and again, is that we get to disciple these kids. We get to equip parents to be disciplers, and we get to disciple our volunteer leaders. And that's a lot of responsibility on us, right? So we are sharing this wonderful burden of discipling and mentoring and teaching these children about the gospel. And so by discipling your volunteer leaders to remind them that they don't just manage kids' behaviors, but they're teaching the truth in love, and they are helping kids learn how to communicate as heart shepherds rather than just these behavior managers. So train your leaders to do that, to have that perspective and that mindset, and always be willing to step in and help in that. So how can you just be thinking about how you see the kids in your ministry through the lens of understanding and not just expecting something of them? Just be curious about that. Think about that. So I just challenge you this week as you're doing your typical programming, whether that's Sunday, whether that's a weeknight ministry, whatever that looks like. Look at one child who has been struggling and just ask the question, what are they trying to tell me? You can step into a classroom and take some of that on for a teacher. You can listen to the things that a teacher is telling you and then just try to understand that, but just consider from that perspective, what is this kid trying to tell me? What are their needs that aren't being met? How is it that they're trying to communicate, or what are their actions communicating? So I just want to invite you to take some time this week to reflect. I'd love to hear your stories. If you want to send me an email, I'd love to hear from you. My email is lauren@ozarkministryconsulting.com. I'd love for you to tell me just what you are thinking and how some of these things have impacted you. Also, I would love for you to hop on over to my website, ozarkministryconsulting.com. If you need some resources for how to just do anything in kids ministry, I would love to help equip you in that space. So you're welcome to book a quick free call. I have a free consulting call. My link is calendar.ozarkministryconsulting.com. And I would love to jump on and just brainstorm to think through some of this. So if you have questions or thoughts, or you're like, I don't know how to handle this situation, that's what I'm here for. I would love to be able to do that, to walk through this with you, to equip you as a leader, to then in turn equip your families and just impact generations. So I'm so glad you're here. If you have questions, please drop a comment below. Happy to help, and look forward to being in touch with you. Thanks for joining me today on the Kidsmin Collective podcast, where we're all about nurturing leaders and impacting generations. Before you go, I want to invite you to take the next step in growing your ministry with confidence. I've created a free Kidsmin Leader Assessment designed just for leaders like you. It walks you through the 5 key areas: purpose, people, programming, physical space, and procedures, helping you celebrate what's going well and uncover where there's room to grow. Whether you're a brand new leader or you've been leading for years, this tool will give you a clear picture of where your ministry stands and where it could go with a little strategy and support. Head over to ozarkministryconsulting.com to get started. You'll find the assessment right on the homepage, quick, simple, and packed with insight. And if this episode encouraged you, share it with a fellow leader or leave a review. We're better when we grow together. Until next time, keep leading well, keep loving big, and remember, your ministry matters.